Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss whether or not Boris Johnson is going to use his illness to give himself a fresh start politically, or if he'll carry on making the same mistakes that have blighted us so far. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, we'd already been told that Boris Johnson was involved whilst still recuperating at Chequers, the Prime Minister's grace in favour country retreat, but now he's back to work properly, chairing cabinet meetings, all the usual stuff, all back to work as properly as it gets for Boris Johnson, let's be honest. And it got me to thinking, will he take advantage of his reset of responsibility? Because that's what he's basically been gifted. Because when you've looked at the way things have been reported in the right-wing newspapers in this country, who have been critical at times of the government's responses of late, they've been careful to keep Boris Johnson personally away from the blame. So if he plays his cards right, he could actually come out with this without any blame for the failures and dump it on his cabinet colleagues instead, without any of it sticking to him. This is despite the fact that our greatest problems stem from the lack of action that took place whilst he was fully fit and well. It was Boris Johnson who ridiculed countries for going into lockdown and then doing himself the same thing weeks too late. It was Boris Johnson who abandoned the test and trace strategy for the infect everyone in the country herd immunity strategy. It was Boris Johnson who failed to authorise emergency orders for as much PPE and other relevant medical equipment that we could get our mitts on. It was Boris Johnson who delayed the formation of the emergency COBRA meetings. And it was also Boris Johnson that when they did eventually start, didn't actually bother to turn up to them for those first crucial weeks. Finally, it was Boris Johnson who completely knackered our scientifically led response by dropping Dominic Cummings into the UK Scientific Advice Panel to politically filter everything being discussed and then suppressing the minutes of those meetings. But as far as most of the media are concerned, Johnson can have a free pass because the worst consequences of his failures didn't occur until he was sick. So he wasn't at the helm at the time, even though it was a natural extrapolation from the time when he was well. So the blame could fall on others. That's how it works. However, all of that essentially depends on how he plays it now, because he's officially back. And although it's likely that Cummings has always been in charge and still is now, Boris Johnson is now the public figurehead of our response. So, will it change? It didn't really sound too much like it. It didn't sound like Boris Johnson was getting ready to throw his cabinet colleagues under the bus just yet. He talked about people wanting to know, being interested in our apparent success. Success? I assume he means the success of having the highest per capita death rate in the world from this virus, for which we got more notice than most people to prepare. He also talked about how predictions were wrong. People got these predictions wrong. Again, I'm assuming he means his own predictions, because the expert predictions have been right on the money. But his initial response to being back on the job was to give the sort of speech that could have been given had he never been away. It's all about, aren't we doing well? Aren't we fantastic? Not the sort of speech that basically says, yeah, some things went wrong, I was ill, I'm sorry about that, but I'm back now, I'm going to sort it all out. So, good in many ways, because it means he feels he's unable to dodge the blame. He could have accepted some of the failings during his absence and said that he was going to get on top of them, and that would have been the best way to dodge the blame for himself, but he hasn't. But as I've said before, I've sometimes wondered if those around him have the goods on him from their law-breaking time at Vote Leave. Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, Michael Gove, Dominic Cummings are all as thick as thieves, literally. He can perhaps afford to sacrifice Matt Hancock. I talked about that last week at some point. But for now, he doesn't seem to be blaming any of the problems on his absence. In fact, he's not even alluding to problems at all. He's actually saying how fantastically we're doing. So he's not actually drawing attention to the fact that he's now back and things will get better. Which is fine for me, because it means he's nailing his colours to the mast, politically speaking. And we can see how he does against Starmer, if he even has the guts to turn up to Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. As had been reported, he did not appear to be in favour of easing restrictions too early. So that's good. But the thing is, there was a lot of talk in the right-wing media about easing the lockdown this week. But for all that talk, Johnson didn't seem to be backing that up. He said that he fears a second outbreak if we ease the lockdown too early. But he did also say that he would boost the economy without risking people's lives. But without really saying how. And this is the thing, to be fair, this is the really knotty issue for even a decent Prime Minister. Saving lives and saving the economy. Where we are in the UK at the moment just seem to be so antagonistic right now. Johnson also has another problem. There is evidence that people are ignoring the lockdown in greater numbers. We're not saying that everyone was totally on board with it from the start, but the number of people who are not on board with it is increasing. We've had the reprehensible Alison Pearson, who's a writer for The Telegraph, effectively normalising the idea that people are unilaterally ignoring the rules. She's almost making it socially acceptable to ignore the lockdown rules. And there are reports, much less anecdotally, there are actual reports that traffic is on the increase, which surely is a sure sign that more people are going out than was the case before. And the fact that so many papers have been reporting that the lockdown would be eased this week with the return of Boris Johnson, reporting it as if it's fact that just hadn't been officially announced yet, can only heighten the problem still further, because people will think to themselves, it's a little bit like when the lockdown was first announced. I remember, working part-time in a college, when the announcement came out that schools and colleges were going to shut on a particular date. Well, some kids didn't wait for that date to come. They just stopped going to school at that point, because the parents presumably took the view, well, if we're going to be closing it anyway for this reason, why would I risk my child by sending them for the next few days? And the same thing can happen in reverse here. People think, well, if the lockdown's going to be eased anyway this week, why don't I just ease myself out of it right now? Because the conditions for easing it have obviously been met. That is the danger of that sort of reporting. So Boris Johnson can't just declare that the lockdown is still in place, because he has to persuade people to improve their behaviour and return to the measures that people are clearly abandoning right now. And as if all that weren't enough on his plate, especially for someone who has as little attention to detail as someone like Johnson does, he's also talking about taking personal charge of the Brexit negotiations as well. But I think that's probably for another video. But anyway, there it is at the moment. I'll keep you updated throughout the week with what Boris Johnson does and says. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.